What's going on, everybody? It's Kurt, and welcome to another episode of the show. On today's episode, I'm going to be talking about emotional agility. The reason I want to talk about it is because I think as an entrepreneur or someone who is in a high stress position in work, someone who's pushing themselves, whether it's in sales or business development or entrepreneurship, you are experiencing a lot of unknowns. You're experiencing a lot of challenges with customers, problem solving. It's a dynamic kind of experience. Whatever it is you're doing, if you're in this type of environment where you're really into that and you're experiencing that, emotional agility is going to help you become unstoppable. I really like some of the resources I'm going to talk about, but let's get into it and talk more in depth about emotional agility and the overall concepts that I have. So, emotional agility. Well, before we can really understand how to deal with it, and there are a lot of methods we're going to go into, but in this post, really in this episode, what we're going to talk about is specifically what it is, what our emotions are to some degree, as well as how to briefly kind of go over ideas of how to kind of deal with it. So emotional agility, it's a topic that really is all about how you can be agile with your emotions. It's really self-explanatory, but what are emotions? Well, emotions are basically defined by what's called the limbic brain. So the reason I really want to get into this topic is because when you think about emotions, as an entrepreneur, you're going through a lot of challenging times. And challenging times typically can be more stressing, and consistently experiencing that sort of scenario in life and in business can be a formula for basically experiencing bad emotions, such as fear, doubt, anxiety, depression, lack of motivation, things like that. And what emotional agility is, you're understanding what your emotions are and you're understanding how to deal with them. And that's really what gives you the sort of flexibility, if you will. It's like that tree in the wind kind of thing, where if you're a stiff oak tree and you have no sort of flexibility, well, you're going to snap, right? Under a lot of stress, under a big storm. But if you're like the palm tree or the more flexible wood that can really just handle that bending and that swaying like you see in big towers they design today, then you have the ability to sort of go through and manage that stuff. So emotional agility is really understanding that you experience those emotions. There is a model that I really love. It's called the triune brain model. And in the post, I kind of break it down. But essentially what it does is it looks at the human brain and it explains that we have essentially three parts. There is a reptilian brain, and that's our brainstem. There is a limbic brain, and that is our mammalian brain, which evolved on top of the reptilian brain. And then there's the human brain, and that's where our prefrontal lobes are. That's where our cortex, the vast majority of our cortex is. We share this brain. A lot of animals have these brain parts. But if you look at like the older evolutionary progression from reptiles to mammals to primates to humans, you're going to see that these brains came along in an evolutionary progression. And the reason it's good to look at this model, the triune brain model, is because it really helps us understand where our emotions come from. So when we were reptiles, before we were actually human beings, a couple 100 million years back, reptiles don't really have abilities to bond with themselves the way mammals do. And that's because they don't have the developed limbic brain. The limbic brain is what evolved on top of reptiles. What reptiles have is they have instincts and sensations, or what we call like felt sense in more therapeutic approaches of describing them. And what that is if you think about an emotion, say, for example, excitement. What does excitement mean to you? Well, for a lot of us, excitement is like a kind of a feeling in your stomach. It's maybe a little bit tingly. It's like energy. It's also accompanied with a smile, usually, of anticipation. It's not just the label of excitement. It's actually the feelings. Those sensations are generated in your nervous system by your brainstem, by the amygdala, by the actual older, archaic, instinctual reptilian brain that is built within your brain. The limbic brain, the mammalian brain, was developed, and that's where we actually get more experience from interacting with other individuals. So you see mammals like cats, dogs, whatever it is, we are a collective species where we actually need to share emotions and feel emotions and have that connection. And so the limbic brain was built on top of the reptilian brain, and it was developed, evolutionary speaking, to allow for us to be more intelligent as a species collectively. And the limbic part of the brain takes these sensations and actually defines them into emotions. So I am feeling this bubbly feeling. Oh, is it anxiety? Is there something unknown out there? Or is it excitement for anticipation of something that is welcoming? So that's how the limbic brain sort of operates. It kind of creates that labeling and that more distinct, if you will, part of the emotions that are actual emotions. So then the human brain, the prefrontal lobe and cortex, a lot of that is designed for analysis. It's designed for really conscious existence and thought. And there's theories around how we develop consciousness. The idea is that we moved from water to land, and as we became more terrestrial, we developed a consciousness to identify and navigate what dangers existed in the geography as we were navigating. So we would basically develop snapshots in our mind and essentially memory, a conscious memory of what was a dangerous area where our predators might exist, as well as what was a safe area. And so the human consciousness and the brain itself, the prefrontal lobes, are designed to set goals, to define values, to strive towards the thoughts and the desires that you really have in life. But if you think about it, it was tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of years that these different parts of the brains were installed. So the actual brains aren't quite really well built necessarily to interact as best with them. You would think like, well, okay, they've evolved over hundreds of millions of years. Why are they not smoothly working out? But the thing is, our society and the way we live now is so different, so radically, exponentially different than the way that we evolved as a biology, that we're just not really coded to handle the things that are going on in today's world. The overwhelming load of options, the stimulation of electronic and digital consumption of media, the decision making, the stresses. So what happens is, like, we have this human brain and this biology that's built to handle all of these things, but it's built in a world that we don't live in now. And so the point of explaining all these parts is that they interact with each other, but they interacted with each other in an environment that was way different than the one we're in now. And so by understanding them, understanding the biology, that you have a felt sense that comes from your reptilian body and brain nervous system, things like your gut feeling, your nervous shaking, maybe things, that are just unexplainable to your conscious human logic brain. And you have a limbic system, a brain that allows you to feel love, feel fear, it basically defines these sensations in a more collective emotional sense. That also gives you some strength there. And so understanding all of these is really a primer and a critical piece to how you can handle building resiliency and emotional agility. So emotional agility, what is it? Well, it's the idea and the understanding of these things, and the idea that you can go face the emotions that might not feel good, might not feel the best. It's realizing that you have emotions, that emotions are good, but they're not always valid, that they're not always something you have to listen to. People often think and say that courage is like the absence of fear, but it's not the absence of fear. It's the action in the face of fear. It's the ability to go forward even when you're feeling fear. It's your desire, it's the why that pulls you even in the face of these disorienting emotions. And so when I talk about emotional agility, what you want to be thinking about is, how do I understand these systems in my body, get in touch with them, use them, because emotions are usually valid, they can be valid, use them to help you identify signals of challenges, but also realize that sometimes they're not valid. Sometimes this is the biology, the old antiquated software and hardware that was installed in you as you evolved over hundreds of millions of years in an environment where you pretty much were just hardwired to reproduce, find food, survive, or escape danger and avoid predation. All of it is really just designed to help you in terms of understanding that. And with the concept of emotional agility, what you're doing is you're essentially looking at this as a whole, and you're realizing, all right, cool, I have emotions. What are they telling me? Are they telling me anything valuable? Are they telling me anything challenging? Is there something I need to do here? And if there's not something you need to do, then chances are you're just facing the natural experiences that you need to push forward and go on with. And there's this saying that I really like that I picked up. I've heard it from people like Tony Robbins, and it says, energy flows where focus goes. And I think it's really valuable. When you look at challenges in business or in life, you want to look at them. The emotions are usually signals telling you to check something out. So you want to look at them. But once you've made a decision that, hey, there's nothing here for me to do. This is just an old signal that's firing off unnecessarily.
We know that dial telephones are easy to use. However, mistakes in dialing do occur.
Once you've done that, then you're at a point where you need to move forward and focus where you want your energy to go. Because if you fixate and focus on the negative emotion, as you probably have seen, that's why I think people spend decades in therapy. They just keep focusing on their problems instead of actually making progress and then refocusing. But once you've identified the issues and you've moved through them, then you focus on where you want to go, and that's where you're going to flow. So I hope this was helpful. If you want to check out more, I highly recommend In an Unspoken Voice by Peter Levine. It's a great, very detailed book about a lot of the studies they've done with trauma, with how animals and how our biology is wired, and how the triune brain model also comes into play. There's also a guy, Dr. Paul McLean, if you want to go into his stuff. He really kind of created the whole model himself and really labeled it and did quite a bit of research there. But yeah, that's pretty much all I've got for you. And if you want to look into further resources on emotional agility and resilience, there's a book called Resilience by a Navy SEAL. It's pretty good. I would also say there's a book there actually called Emotional Agility by Susan David. She's a Harvard psychologist that I've read that's good. It's got some basic info in there. And then The Confidence Gap by Russ Harris. Fantastic book. Also really outlines a lot of the concepts we talked about here with just realizing your emotions, facing them, and moving forward. So until next time, keep crushing, keep sending the feedback, and have a great one.